So for B Corps, benefit corporations, Imperative 21, this evolution of business structures and philosophy and been spearheaded and championed by our next speaker and Do More Good Movement Foundational Advisor, J. Coen Gilbert. Jay is the co-founder of B Lab, the nonprofit behind the B Corp movement. He has helped advocate for the advancement of benefit corporation legislation around the country and is the CEO of Imperative 21. Please give a warm welcome and expand our circle of compassion to J. Coen Gilbert, CEO of Imperative 21. Jay, I think you're still on mute.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, you can.
Awesome. Graham, thank you so much. Really appreciate that overly kind introduction. And I'm quite humbled. And mostly want to just start by disabusing everybody who's been listening of a false narrative that the stuff that you just heard about is about me. Is I've been a part of a incredible and growing and global team of folks that helped conceive and evolve the B Corp model over the last 15 years, and who helped reimagine and push us to think about how to be much more collaborative with others, like our friends at Conscious Capitalism, and others who helped create this Imperative 21 network that's driving economic systems change. And so I am really grateful to be a part of it and to contribute what I can, but certainly don't want to be claiming anything other than and being a joyful participant. So anyway, but thank you for that. And thank you, Rand, and thank you, Kate, for your awesome presentations. Super hard acts to follow. I will do my best to share with you a little bit about from my experience and sort of this notion of expanding our circle of compassion. And the Einstein quote's really powerful. And so I'm really glad to have this whole thing framed in that way. I'm going to share my screen real quick, and hopefully what you're seeing here is a much younger version of me sitting there in the center, standing there in the center, with my arms around my best friends and partners in a company called And One that we founded back in the mid-90s, early 90s. And as I look at the guy just to my stage left, Bart Houlihan, I'm also looking at him out the window right here, because I am just overjoyed, because like what this picture symbolized with our arms around each other and not social distancing is today I'm visiting my longtime partner and closest friend, Bart, and other partner, Andrew Kasoy, for the first time in 15 months, and being able to see them and hug each other. And I wish we were all together, gathered in Lincoln, being able to be with each other and physically, because it's been a long time. And I know I'm craving some human connection. And so I appreciate being invited into this circle and offering what I can. This business, And One, so I come at this from an entrepreneur's background. I come at this as a business person and have been an investor. Is we built a company for almost 15 years that on the day we sold it, we happened to be on the cover of Sports Illustrated. And what it was talking about was this other game that we were playing, which was mostly, they were talking about street ball versus NBA or college organized basketball. But the other game that we were really playing for those 15 years that very few people were aware of other than the people that were at the company, which was this other game of being a conscious capitalist, right? This other game of being a conscious business that wasn't doing it because there was a positive business case, although there was. We weren't doing it because there was better employee retention and productivity, but there was. We weren't doing it because it gave us stronger supplier relationships that stood by us in times of real challenge and sort of existential threat to our business, but it did. We did it because it was how we wanted to live our lives. And we wanted our parents to be proud of us, and we wanted our kids to be proud of us. And we wanted to be able to look in the mirror and say we ran a business that that was conscious and a business that created value for everybody, not just for ourselves. And so everybody had stock options. Everybody got paid time off to do community service. All of our factories were audited by third parties for their code of conduct. We gave away 5% of our profits to youth and education organizations, over $2 million, to groups like City Year and the KIP, and we help expand a high-performing public charter school from 90 to over 2,000 students. And we did that because it was something that we wanted to have a company that we could be proud of. It also happened to be a better business model. What we didn't realize at the time was that we were part of a much bigger movement of shifting from this 20th century model of shareholder capitalism to a 21st century model of stakeholder capitalism. As Rand talked about, moving from a short-term mentality to a long-term mentality, from one that was creating a value exclusively for us and our shareholders to one that was inclusive of all of our workers and our suppliers, et cetera, from one that was thinking about itself as extracting value to one that was generating value for all. This trend that we're all a part of, you are a part of it because you're sitting here at the Do More Good conference. We're at an inflection point, and we're at an inflection point not because of a failure of leadership, but we're at an inflection point because of failure of systems. And whether those are ecological systems, whether those are economic systems, whether those are healthcare systems, whether those are political systems, we are at an inflection point at this incredible confluence of forces that are really challenging us to reevaluate not just our own consciousness, but what is the consciousness of the system, and how do we set up a system so it reflects our evolving consciousness. And we're seeing some incredible momentum on that front from really significant existing power structures like the Business Roundtable or the World Economic Forum, and all the folks that are covering mainstream economic activity. Forbes and Fortune, The Economist, the Financial Times. Everybody is on board with conscious capitalism. Everybody's on board with inclusive capitalism. Everybody's on board with capitalism that exists to create benefit for all stakeholders. The B Corp community has been about that since the mid-2000s. And every single one of those nearly 4,000 B corporations has declared their interdependence and signed this B Corporation Declaration of Interdependence, which I won't go into. You can read it. It's pretty cool. And it's a statement of shared values, our version, let's say, of the credo that Rand talked about. And it starts with where I think there's a lot of overlap is the very first thing that we recognize and that we state that we believe is that we must be the change we seek in the world, that this does start with us and individual responsibility and accountability for our actions, that all businesses ought to be conducted as if people and place mattered, and that it's through their products, their practices, and their profits that businesses should aspire to do no harm and to benefit all. And that requires that we act with the understanding that we're each dependent upon another and thus responsible for each other and future generations. There's now nearly 4,000 B corporations, as Graham described. They've met these incredibly rigorous standards of overall social and environmental performance, transparency, and legal accountability to balance purpose and profit. These are just some of them. While Kate was talking earlier, I quickly highlighted a couple of companies here. You'll recognize some of these names, you won't recognize others. But Avocado Green Mattress, King Arthur Flour, and Clean Canteen, which are the three light gray backgrounded logos that Kate described as examples, shining examples of great 1% for the 1% for the planet companies, also, not coincidentally, happen to be certified B corporations. Because they're not only doing this in their practices, but they've also adopted a governance structure to change the actual incentive structures within their organizations and align their governance with their intentions. It's not just small and growing companies in the US and around the world, but also a ton of multinationals have acquired B Corp subsidiaries. Unilever and Danone, P&G, Nestle, Coke, and The Gap all have B Corp subsidiaries. And there are now over 20 publicly traded B Corps in various jurisdictions around the world. A number of sort of unicorn billion-dollar IPOs over the last 24 months, including most recently our friends over at Coursera, and existing publicly traded companies that are converting to adopt that benefit corporation structure that Graham talked about. A $45 billion market cap company called Viva, a life health sciences company, that converted to be a public benefit corporation. But all of that individual leadership is not really what inspires me the most. What inspires me the most is when these companies do stuff together. And the first thing is like collective action to raise our expectations. And so when the BRT put out their statement about committing to create value for all stakeholders, the B Corp community, which had been practicing that for over a decade, welcomed them to this evolution of capitalism, to this phase of our development. So let's get to work. Let's figure out how we can do this and accelerate each other's journey together. There's lots of stuff that the B Corp community can learn from, and there's lots of stuff that those BRT companies can learn from. And how do we learn from each other to advance and accelerate this transition to stakeholder capitalism? More concretely, there were a group of 150 certified B corporations in Chile, in South America, who in response to the uprisings there around just incredible inequality, said, we're gonna create a challenge, the Desafío 10X challenge, which is gonna ask all businesses to commit to having a differential between the highest and lowest pay scales for their employees of 10X. With only 1,500 B corporations in the country, they got almost 1,600 companies within 2 months to commit to that 10X challenge. And so the power of leadership is not only to lead in your individual company, but to band together with other leaders and to set really bold and ambitious targets that inspire other people to join you. And not just on social dimensions like inequality, but also on climate change. As a result of those protests and the riots in Santiago, the Congress of the Parties, the COP climate gathering, had to move because it wasn't safe to do it in Santiago, in Chile, and it moved to Madrid. And within 2 months, the world's attention shifted to Madrid for the COP thing. And while the rest of the world was focused on trying to get to net zero by 2050, over 800 B corporations declared their commitment to get to net zero by 2030 with their scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions using science-based targets, 20 full years ahead of the Paris Agreement. Over 800 B Corps from 33 countries. And our goal by the end of this year for COP26 in Edinburgh is that there'll be 50% of the global B Corp community of over 2,000 companies that will have committed, over 4,000 companies, sorry, that will be committed to a just transition to net zero by 2030. These are a couple of examples of concrete action within their companies that are also inspiring others to act. But as Rand said, we want to swim upstream. And that when we swim upstream from conscious actions to conscious culture to conscious leadership, if you swim further upstream, what we realize is that the internal cultures are subject to an external environment. Whether the external environment is about a broader cultural narrative around individualism or around acquisition and or about us versus them, those are constraints on leaders' behavior. And similarly, the system of incentives, the public policies that provide the guardrails and the level playing field for business leadership to take place, those are also incredibly important factors that set the framework within which leadership can not just aspire to be conscious, but can actually put that consciousness into practice. And so one of the things that the global B Corp community has done over the last year or so is sort of recognize that there's also, in addition to those 40 laws that Graham mentioned, is that there's a need to move beyond just corporate law and making sure that companies have the ability to adopt a broader set of fiduciary duties of care, but that also includes investors. Because one of the things we've seen when you have conscious leaders like the former CEO and chairman of the board of Danone, Emmanuel Faber, among the most conscious leaders and the most courageous leaders on the planet, got forced out of his job because of a misalignment between the capital markets and what they care about and what an incredibly conscious company like Danone cared about. And so we have to create an overarching system and structure that aligns with our evolved consciousness to expand our circle of compassion beyond ourselves, our shareholders, even the four walls of our company and our own value chains, but to include, as Rand said, all of us. Despite all of this momentum, and all of this power in this global B Corp movement, what we realize is that we're not going to address the climate emergency. We're not going to build an inclusive economy. We're not going to achieve the SDGs unless we reset our economic system. And the B Corp community is only one small element of a much broader global movement to use business as a force for good. That movement came together for the first time in a very powerful way about 18 months ago. And then more publicly about 8 or 9 months ago as a network called Imperative 21 that believes the imperative of the 21st century is to reset our economic system so that its purpose is to create shared well-being on a healthy planet. B Lab and Conscious Capitalism, our friends at the B Team, Chief Executives for Corporate Purpose, the Global Impact Investing Network, Common Future, Just Capital, and the incredible storytellers over at Participant Media are the network stewards of this broad group. And collectively, they represent over 70,000 businesses with over 20 million employees, almost $7 trillion in revenues and $15 trillion in assets under management. There's already a lot of momentum behind this idea of elevating our gaze beyond supporting individual leaders, but to helping to shift the culture in which those leaders operate and to shift the incentive structures and the policy and regulatory environment in which they operate to actually facilitate instead of hinder this type of conscious leadership. Imperative 21 is this network of coalitions and collaborations and pilots that are engaging both existing power, like we've been talking about, and emerging power in workers and civil society and culture makers and artists and in students who are seeing a future that we can only barely imagine. And linking them in really authentic conversations with the existing powers in C-suites and boards and investors and policymakers to reimagine and reset our economic system. Last September was a pretty seminal moment. We were 50 years to the day from Milton Friedman's seminal essay in the New York Times Magazine that said the social responsibility of business is to increase its profits. We said collectively in September of 2020, 50 years to the date after that essay, that no, the purpose of business is to create shared well-being on a healthy planet. And that reset enables all the different movements around the world, movements for worker voice and power, movements for climate action, movements for inclusion, movements for racial justice, movements for natural capitalism, movements for a just transition and for gender equity. All of those things are not achievable without a reset of our economic system. So all of that is well and good, but people aren't usually moved by words. They're moved by art, by culture, by images that speak to our hearts, not just our minds. And so we partnered with an incredible group of artists from around the world, coordinated by a group called Amplifier. And they created this incredible human-centered artwork that could distill these imperatives for economic systems change that you saw in the video about designing for interdependence, investing for justice, and accounting for stakeholders, and distilled that into their essence and put faces to those concepts. And so we're moving from an economy that focuses on whether or not we should have a minimum wage of X or Y and saying that the objective is to have a living wage. Focusing from an economy that uses technology to concentrate power to one that uses it to distribute power. One that focuses on creating financial security for American workers and focuses on a culture of shared prosperity, not winner take all. And not just having free markets, but having fair markets. This artwork was distributed around the world by hundreds of allied organizations and encapsulated these three imperatives for economic systems change and this transformed way in which we view ourselves as business leaders and view our own power. It was launched with full-page ads in the New York Times, in the US, in the Financial Times in the UK, in this incredible 7-story tower video display that mashed up the art, and that video that you saw on NASDAQ with our partners at NASDAQ, recognized that even in the heart, in the belly of the beast of the capital markets, there's an increasing recognition that we need to rethink, reimagine, and reset our economic system. You saw that then shared around the world in these huge, large-scale art projections in Sao Paulo on Avenue Paulista, in the US, and in other places. And you saw that message shared and by civil society leaders like Christiana Figueres, by business leaders like Paul Pullman, the CEO, former CEO of Unilever, by the leaders of the Impact Investing Network like Ahmed Bouri and the B team like Hamas Tamastadir, and for the first time all uniting around a common message for this need to reset. And what we'd invite all of you to do is to join us and to support the reset in your communications, in your spheres of influence, as you're talking to media, peers, in your trade associations, and of course in your own organizations, whether that's on issues that you care about around racial or gender equity, around worker voice and power, around climate justice, or around supporting the achievement of the SDGs. We want to invite you to join us in building this new cooperating system for our economy and resetting, and hope you'll join us. So with that, just want to thank all the organizers, and really excited to join with our friends Kate and Preeta and Rand in a conversation in a few minutes. So thanks a lot, and looking forward to continuing the conversation together.